welcome back everybody to This Is Our Story. We've decided that this one is probably going to be our last one, given the fact that my days are unpredictable now as I'm very due to have a baby. So
I love how you say probably, because
it's happening.
We have said this a number of times, but the deadline is basically set in terms of your bodily functions. So it's a little bit out of our control.
Yeah. So
it kind of has to be the last one, to be honest.
Yeah, this one will probably be a bit longer. So bear with us as we try and wrap up in sort of an hour.
We've got like 6 years to talk about.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover. So to be honest, we're not going to muck around with story time this week. Right, the question we wanted to ask each other actually, instead of story time, was if you could go into any time of your life, where would it be? And for myself, I'll answer this first and then I'll ask Kieran. But it took a little bit of thinking with this question, actually, like thinking back into childhood years and then adult years. And I really feel like, honestly, I mean, I've had lots of highlights in life, of course, but it hasn't really been until even in the last 10 years, when I felt true happiness about where I am in life and who I'm with and the things that I'm doing with, that person, where I felt like I was truly happy. So I can't think of a specific moment, but it's just a feeling, when you when you
and
feel
sometimes
happy.
you don't know that you've changed, right? You only know this in reflection.
Exactly. And
you can't really pinpoint an exact time that made the difference. Yeah.
No. And so I can't necessarily say a specific moment, even though there's been lots of places where I'd definitely go back to. And actually, this is something I wanted to clear up from the last one or one before, when we were talking about places we'd travel to, and I said Paris, but actually I take that back, because after I said that I was like, no, that's not even my most favourite place.
I mean, these days you get robbed in Paris.
Yes.
People complain about it being dangerous all the time.
But I'm changing my answer to Croatia, because every time someone asks me that, I'm like, oh, Croatia, I'd go back every year. I've been about 3 times and it would still be my top place to go. So I don't know why I said Paris, even though it is a magical place. But Croatia is my answer. So just had to clear that up.
You and all the other expats over there, I'm sure. It's like populated with like Kiwis and Australians. They love going to Split.
Oh, it's an amazing place. But anyway, if I can throw that question back to you, Kieran, if you could go to...
well, first of all, kia ora. Didn't say that before. Hello, everyone. And just in preparation, it has been quite dreary weather and it'll be a bit stormy. So if you hear anything in the background, that will be it. It's also sweltering. So if I feel the need to just remove some items of clothing, don't be alarmed, Briar.
Yes, don't forget that I can see you.
Okay, so I think for me, going back in time to a period of life, it's kind of a different... I'm not quite sure how to view this particular question, because am I going back in time to redo it, or am I just going back to do it all over again? Because I don't know if there's any period of my life I'd necessarily do over the same way. Like I think all of us would say we'd do things slightly differently if we went back in time. But in terms of a time of life where I felt probably the most excited to be alive, the most... where everything seemed exciting and unreal and the world was my oyster. It's probably kind of the point we're about to discuss. And last time in our last episode, we kind of finished up with a very kind of intense moment where it was a perfect shitstorm in terms of my relationship with my partner. And we were on our way back to Thailand, and she had asked for us to kind of sleep together again and kind of reconcile, and I had said no. So I wouldn't go back to that moment because that was quite dark. But in the times ahead, I mean, there's a lot of messiness there, but this feeling of being in this country and this new country, and Thailand it's such an intense place to be. There's so much to experience. There's so many different types of food, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the people, and everything about it was just so intoxicating. And that when you go to a place like that for the first time, that feeling is something you'll never get back. And that, I felt that feeling for probably the next few years of being in Thailand. And it was, despite all the bullshit that was going on in my personal life, the feeling of being in a place where I felt almost completely free to be who I wanted to be. That was just something I'd never experienced anywhere else. And to be honest, still have not felt since. So I'll circle around to this as we talk, as we continue on. So I'll carry on with my story then, and from where we left off. So we got back to Thailand. We continued to sleep separately, obviously. Now I can't quite remember the timeline here. It's quite hazy, but at some point we had a conversation about what do we do now? And I'm pretty sure it was my partner who initiated it. And the tone of the conversation was, I think maybe we need some time apart. And it was her idea because I wanted it to be. I desperately wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be the one to bring it up because I just didn't know how. And I remember we had friends come along and join us. And it was like it was a very civilized. It didn't feel as messy as it had been, or definitely not as messy as I expected. I'm pretty sure we just like prayed together, and it's quite surreal looking back at just kind of this eye of the storm type scenario. So she moved into the accommodation at her school, and then I had this apartment to myself.
What a relief.
It was, but because I didn't really have any close friends to talk about this stuff with, just and all my desire not to be alone, but all my desire to have control of my life again, and all of a sudden I've got it. What do I do with it? What do I do with this freedom, And throughout this process, that's right, I just remembered what we talked about last time because I talked about the church stuff, right? And so that all that church drama immediately followed that moment, and all the gossiping and stuff. So probably a matter of weeks, maybe a couple of months after we'd split, and I lost all of those church friends, and then all of a sudden I was in this place and completely alone with no idea what I was doing. At the stage was working as an English teacher, and the people I worked with were amazing. They were just so cool, and I still know some of them today, still close friends, and none of them had, as I mentioned last time, none of them had anything to do with church. They were all pretty religious, actually, and it was so refreshing to get absolutely no judgment. They had their own dramas going on, but it's just funny, like when you're with people who aren't in church, it's funny the kind of things that aren't drama.
Yes.
You're like I don't know, like
no pressure.
Someone sleeping with who, or that person's cheated on someone. I mean, as we don't encourage this, obviously, but they're just kind of
your problems probably seemed minute compared to other stuff. Like it's not a big deal, but
people knew the stuff was going on, but we didn't really talk about it. It was just escapism, but we went out a lot, and this is when I started to probably drink for the first time. Never really, always being quite controlled with my drinking.
It's because it's weird the first few times you go out, right? You're like, this feels fun, but also
and I was in this kind of transition stage of, am I still a Christian? Like, do I still love God? Like, do I still
what are my values?
Yeah, like I didn't know anymore, and I felt that I should be a good boy, a good Christian, but I didn't have that community anymore. So what did it count for if I was doing these things, if I didn't have a church house to call home? That was a really confusing time for me, and I don't know, it was confusing, but I just slowly worked it out, and I can't remember the timeline in that first year well enough to really kind of explain how that progressed for me. But I do remember just starting to really enjoy myself, going out and doing some crazy shit with my friends. Like we went to strip clubs, which is in Thailand is a little bit different than it would be elsewhere, because I mean, I wouldn't do this now, but back then it was just a really fun environment where you go with a group of friends, and because they're kind of open to all times of night. Obviously, there are always going to be people there, and drinks are cheap, and all the stuff is kind of going on in the background. You're not really focusing on it. You're just hanging out with your friends. It was really odd, because in a million years, I could not have seen myself doing that just even 6 months prior to that. Like, fucking wild. During this time, whilst kind of getting to know myself and starting to have fun, I got myself into a relationship quite soon after, really soon after, actually. And it was not great for me to jump straight into a relationship, but it's no surprise.
But it's
really,
so common, right?
So common.
That's why they call it the rebound. But I guess you wanted to fill a void, I guess, that you probably always had. But
absolutely. But I fell for this girl really quickly because she was the opposite of my partner. Very soft spoken. Like, I just enjoyed her company. She was lovely, kind. What didn't really have a bad bone in her, And unsurprisingly, I desired that in my life. Did I know what I really wanted, like for myself? Of course not. I had no idea. I'd had my whole foundation pulled apart. No church, no family around. Like, whilst you guys knew about what was going on vaguely, we didn't talk very much, right? I didn't really talk to mum and dad very much at that time. We talked sometimes. We saw each other in that first year. You came and visited, which was difficult because I remember I wanted to introduce you to this girl, but because mum and dad came as well. Yes. I remember feeling quite pissed off that you thought it was a bad idea. And so I didn't. That first year is all a bit muddled up for me, but I do remember that. She was so good to me, but hand in hand, I was trying to balance this desire to find myself and not go crazy, but just do whatever I wanted, because I'd been held back for so long, not just by a controlling partner, but also by this rule system that had come through, that I'd had growing up in the church. And you've been through all of this yourself, so you would understand. Yeah. So I felt like I almost had to prove that I wasn't being held back anymore. I had to prove that I had control. And that didn't mean me getting drunk, because I think I've always been responsible, right? I'd done my best to make good decisions. But now I was making good decisions for my own benefit, not for somebody else. So that was quite an interesting time. I remember the first time I got high. That was in that first year. However, it was secondhand smoke, because drugs for me has always been a no-no. Never wanted to go there. Same with smoking as well. So I didn't get those traditional temptations that a lot of people do when they are single and out in the big wide world. But yeah, I did get really high because all my friends were smoking weed around me, and that kind of freaked me out, actually, because that made me really feel like a bad person, because it was just this
feels
hangover.
Like a step too far.
Yeah, this hangover, worrying about sin and the wages of sin. In the end, the conflict between this kind of dating this lovely girl and having this kind of stable, predictable life with her, and this desire on the other hand to have this fun and a little bit wild, within my own boundaries of course, but a little bit wild, hanging out with friends whenever I wanted, going out and doing crazy shit whenever I wanted, that didn't line up. And in the end I couldn't.
Can't have it both ways, can you?
Yeah, I think the background to that particular relationship coming to an end was because there was a lot of gossip going on, because we had a lot of the same friends in church, and because people expected me to make an effort to get back with my partner, that caused a lot of friction, as you can probably imagine. If I had just moved on so quickly, because obviously it was showing that I wasn't really interested in giving my marriage a real good go. And just to backpedal a little bit, when I separated from my partner, I knew from that very moment that I was not up for reconciliation. I did not want to try harder and make it work. I'd known this for a long time. It wasn't a decision that I took lightly, but it was a final. The decision had a massive sense of finality about it. And the only way, though, that I could kind of get myself out of the situation in the first place was by promising
tell her that
we would work on it. And to work on it, that meant going to counselling. Now, I'd mentioned before going to a professional counsellor, which did not work out because he said things that she didn't want to hear. So we actually ended up going to see a pastor and his wife at another church that we had started going to. Because of all the drama in our church, we'd left that. Well, the idea was that we left that and then went somewhere else. And these pastors are really nice people, but they had no idea how to save the situation. They just, there was a lot of awkward conversations, really, because I super did not want to be there. And they would ask a lot of questions like that you would expect counselors to ask.
It's so tricky because how can you be truly honest?
I must have come across as so inauthentic, and I know that I didn't respect the process, and that I wish I could do again, because this messy part, I could have dealt with better. I know why I dealt with it the way that I did, but I know I could have done better. And I'm sure I could probably created or stirred up a lot of resentment with my partner. I think, we haven't really spoken since then, so I couldn't tell you how she felt, but I know that it would have been bad. She would have felt really bad. Because I remember, and I've said this maybe a few times, I know that she loved me. Her feelings were very genuine. She didn't express them in a very healthy way, but I know that at the heart of it is that she was just desperate to get the same kind of love in return.
Yeah.
And
it just went the wrong way about it too.
Yeah. I can't fault her with all the stuff that's gone in her background and everything, all of that. And I wish I'd been more empathetic to that at that time. But there was a time, I think the last meeting that we had together, counselling, I was asked the direct question, something along the lines of, I was asked pretty directly, do you think that you ever loved? Or did you know what love is? Like, what does it mean to love your partner? And I think I said it pretty clearly that I don't think I ever knew what it meant to love.
Was she there with you? Was this?
Yeah, this was couple counselling. And that was a pretty rough moment for her.
Well, it would be.
And she was like, well, I guess that's the answer, because you never really loved me. And it was a really, really heavy moment. And I think that was pretty much the end at that point.
That would have probably been quite hurtful to hear.
Yeah. And I admit that. These are things
I'm not saying you shouldn't have said it.
No,
you were being honest, but
these are things that needed to be said, but the delivery could have been better. And I don't think we really talked after that. There were a few times when I was dating this other girl, right, when she assumed that I was still working on it. She didn't know about it. And then she got really mad because she got super mad when she found out. So it was like I was cheating. That was what culminated in me having to leave the church in the end. That's when it got really messy. And then we ended up having to we were always hiding. Yeah. This girl and I were always hiding, being together. And I was always worried about running into people that I knew. Bangkok's a huge place. I was always scared that someone that I knew was going to be around the corner. When I was technically married, but we weren't together, right? So these are the kind of rules that I just felt really
justify it, I guess.
Yeah, but it's this expectation in church of doing things in a particular way. I think outside of church, it would have been a non-event. Well, people might have talked about it, but not in the same sense of this is a betrayal of who you are and who your partner is. Like there wouldn't have been so much guilt attached to it. So to step away from all of that and away from the church people, and then once I finally moved on from this, this relationship, I felt quite troubled by it, but also very free. Like probably the first time I felt free. And I just got a new job at that time, and I made a whole bunch of new friends. And so I was even one more step removed. So it was like each chapter getting a little bit further away from my old life. And we were going out quite often, still like obviously keeping myself in check, not going too crazy. But yeah, we did go out a fair bit. And I started dating again. I started using Tinder actually for the first time ever at that time, because I was properly single, and that was interesting actually. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd actually never dated before, never, because remember that my partner was my first everything. So I didn't know what to do. So as soon as someone showed some kind of sense of affection or interest, I was like, oh my God, so excited.
Which again is so normal coming out of a relationship like one like yours.
Oh, totally. And I think now I was really looking for something different that really matched a chapter of life I was in. And this chapter of life was probably what I would call adventure. I was desperate to get and start actually enjoying life again and seeing the world and experiencing everything within reason. But yeah. And I met this girl we started dating within 3 months, I think, of breaking up with the previous one. I think it was 3 months. And things went pretty quickly. And then like we were dating for a few months, and then all of a sudden she just like moved in.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So then we were just living together after a few months. It went really fast because I thought that's how I understood it. Like if you have feelings for someone, you jump all the way in, right? She was slower at first, but I've always been a bit of a romantic, so I guess I won her over. But that relationship, I understand I'm kind of speeding through some things here, but that relationship was really interesting actually, because a lot of her personality traits actually were quite similar to my ex-wife. And she was a different person, 100%. She was Thai. She had done a lot of travel and was very kind of worldly wise. But her personality, she was not the same, but there were definitely some similar traits there. And the controlling aspect, the unwillingness to talk about anything, unwillingness to kind of bend on just even the most simple things, and very jealous. That was the thing that really kind of created a lot of drama actually over the 2 years we were together.
Is it that long?
Yeah. So before I get to that, what I did love about this particular relationship is that we just did so much travel together, and she was really adventurous and didn't want to go for anything fancy. So it was always hostels and
cheap and cheerful.
Very cheap. And we just had like some of the coolest adventures. It's one of the adventures that we went on in the north of Thailand. Like you can never predict everything in Thailand, right? Things can go pear-shaped so quickly. And we kind of missed a bus or something. We ended up having to drive on a truck with bags of rice, and we were hitchhiking and all this kind of stuff. I never in a million years would have done on my own unless I'd been kickstarted by somebody else. And so that's why I think I held on to that relationship for so long. It was not a smooth relationship. There was definitely a lot of things going on. She definitely cared about me. She was just a cool person. But in terms of relationships, she didn't really know how to. She was just not soft. Very hard. And I think what I needed in a person, in a relationship, was that balance between someone who's got their shit together, knows what they're about, but also is a bit supple,
Yeah.
is willing to just kind of go with the ebb and flow of life. So I think in the last months of us being together, so we would go on these trips together and have an amazing time, but I always knew that we had to account for at least 1 to 2 days that would turn to absolute shit because she'd get in a bad mood. And I mean,
but you were used to dealing with that kind of unpredictability. So.
Exactly. And at some point, I guess I started making some friends. At this stage, I was working at an international school and very like a solid, stable job, quote unquote, proper teaching job, so not second language. I had some stability in my life. I had some great friends that I'd met because I studied Thai there and was very passionate about that, but I made a really great group of friends and had some really good colleagues as well at work. And I think these people just started to open my eyes to what I was worth. And so I would tell them some of the stories that some of the shit I was putting up with, and they were just like, you're not, like, that's fucked.
Yeah.
And they would tell me straight up, it's just not okay. And
but finally some people that cared enough to actually speak up for you and be like, hey, look, that's not normal.
Yeah.
Which you hadn't really had before, right?
Yeah. It meant so much to me. And it's why I still am connected with some of these people now, because it's what I'd craved like my whole life, really. Even when I was really young, I never had that. Just friends who would just be there and say things that need to be said. And it's also, fast forward now, why I value being that for others, because you can never discount.
We all need a friend like that.
100%. And there was one particular event that happened. I had a best mate, and she needed someone to look after her cat. She was going away. And I volunteered. I was like, okay, I'll stay at your apartment, and don't worry, I'll look after the cat while you're away. It's fine. And then my ex-girlfriend, I told her about this, but then she didn't believe me because she was certain that I was cheating. I was cheating with this girl, obviously. And that kind of got really, really dramatic. And in the end, I had to tell my friend at the last moment that I couldn't do it. And it really fucked things up with my friend, obviously. She had to go and spend heaps of money on a cat hotel, really last minute. Our friendship was damaged. My relationship was further damaged because of the argument. And then after that whole fury, my friend was like, that's not okay. That's a lot of stress on you, and that's not fair. It really fucked up a lot of things. It affected quite a few people, and you don't deserve to be with someone who would do that. And yeah, so I think throughout these years, and like over these 2 years, I was just kind of learning the kind of value that I have. And it was really, really important to figure this out, because so these things are, you hear this from parents, or you hear this from people around you, friends or whatever. They help you build up a sense of who you are and why you mean something to them. I hadn't had that for a long time. Well, you had no
confidence, right? And you didn't even know who you were. So
yeah. So basically, yeah. So we broke up eventually, and it was very. I think at that point, it's like each time I've gone through this type of experience, I've just gotten a little bit stronger, which is what we can all we can hope for, really, right? Is that we learn from it, but.
But you're kind of creating like building blocks in your life, right? Building on these experiences that you are having.
Yeah.
Whether they're negative or not, they're still building blocks, aren't they?
And I obviously had there was definitely some shit that I hadn't dealt with from my marriage. I'm 10 years. How can you say that just that stuff disappears? Because it doesn't.
It doesn't.
And that was definitely hanging on. After I broke up, I actually went back to the same counselor and had a couple of sessions with him, because I was just starting to feel things boiling away. And I didn't deal with them in those couple of sessions, because you can't really deal with anything in a couple of sessions. But it was kind of a good realization for me that something was going on there and that I needed to sort this out. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here because, time. The baby could pop out at any moment. I don't want to be rudely interrupted by the wee one. It's not a great start. So I actually met someone. Oh, okay. So I went back home, quote unquote home. Complicated subject. But by this point, Mum and Dad had left Saudi Arabia and had gone back to Hervey Bay in Queensland. I think it was their second year there. And I went back with them, and we were kind of with my girlfriend. We were kind of, are we staying together or not? I went back and I didn't invite her, and I think that was the final straw. Anyway, I needed to go back and I needed to spend time alone. And I was with Mum and Dad for 2 weeks. Surprise Dad. And it was interesting, actually. Interesting experience, because I wasn't the same person who had seen them just, 2 years prior. I had gone through a lot of stuff. I was in a completely different chapter of life now. I felt that, probably what you felt, that they were judging me for some of the decisions I had made. I had moved away from church. That definitely came up. I don't remember what we talked about, but it did come up. And then it was also just me trying to figure out Mum and Dad again, because I don't know, they were like strangers, and vice versa, really. And this is something that has kind of stayed with both you and I think, through this whole process, through our adult years, because we've been apart for so long. And at this time, I was also processing the upcoming breakup, if you will. And it was nice. It was nice. I couldn't ever have imagined living there, which is what I ended up doing a few years later. But it was very, very quiet. That's all I remember. Didn't really do much. There's nothing much to do in Hervey Bay. So I went back. Now, this is disputed, but somewhere along that line, coming back through Singapore, I was scrolling on Tinder, as you do when you have time to kill in an airport. And I matched with a girl and didn't think anything of it. And then went back to Bangkok. And there was an intervening period with my girlfriend where we were together, but basically not. So, God, it was awful. It was awful. So she was living with me, right? I had this house, this apartment that was basically mine. Like, I'd chosen it. I think I was paying all the rent at that stage. I don't remember. Anyway, she had decided that, we had decided that we had broken up, but she had nowhere to go, which she reminded me of repeatedly because she wanted to make me feel guilty. She would sit out the lounge and then scroll through Tinder, like deliberately, so that I could see. And that wasn't great. Wasn't a great feeling. Very messy. I recommend, if you break up with someone, just get them to move out.
Get out.
I do not recommend that situation at all. Anyway, so started chatting with this girl that I'd matched with in Singapore. And I don't know, it just felt great, actually. I was just chatting with this person, and there was no pressure to meet her because she lived in Singapore. So I was able to still enjoy my life and still go through this process of figuring out who I was, going out and having fun with friends, but didn't have the pressure of going and seeing this girl all the time, which is pretty much what I tended to do, right? Because when I got into something, I was just like 150% committed. And it was quite it was nice. It was an organic process. We'd chat constantly online all the time, and then we started doing video calls. I still remember the first one, like you. Very awkward.
Awkward, yeah.
But it was just nice. And in fact, we talked for 3 months without even meeting each other face to face. And I went down and I met her in Singapore, and it was amazing. Everything was just amazing. That whole experience. I don't regret this at all, this whole chapter of my life, because this part was just, I was over the moon. And, I felt like finally I'd found someone who just kind of matched me in energy, made me feel good about myself, made me just enjoy being alive. It was that very real romantic love, 100%. And now I'm like, fuck, now I know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't felt that with my ex. I felt great fondness. This is my ex-girlfriend who I'd just broken up with. That was a fondness and an enjoyment of being together, but there was not this passionate love. And I was all into the expressions, big expressions, like I was in my 20s again. That's how it felt. Yeah. And it was intoxicating. So I do understand it when people fall in love for the first time. I get it because I've been there. And it's like, holy shit, there is that one person. Yeah. Anyway, so we were doing this long distance thing for a while, 6 months in total. I'd fly down, she'd fly up. Every now and then I did like surprise trips down as well. I have a very memorable experience of rushing to catch a flight and getting to the airport and going to check in and them telling me it was the wrong airport.
Oh no.
Holy shit. The money I spent in those 6 months is just like insane. Because it was every single month we'd do a trip. And so in the end I decided it was not unsustainable. So I decided that it was time to probably move on from Thailand. My contract at my school had come to an end, and it was a really interesting, and I'll just go back a little bit. Sorry, I know I'm taking up this whole thing, but there's a lot of time to talk about. I really discovered a passion for teaching, and this was
which you hadn't had
so
before, right?
Left field, so unexpected. I absolutely loved it, and I loved the kids I worked with, and they loved me. It was just, you could tell, like for the first time in my life, I was doing something that I actually 100% believed in, and still do, to be honest. Some of the relationships I built with those kids still exist. So I left Thailand eventually in 2018. Some of those kids still send me messages on Instagram.
Oh.
It's very, very sweet, and they're in their teens now. So I saw some of them when I went back in 2020 for a quick visit, and they all ran out and mobbed me. Mr. Kieran. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yep, that's the way they did it at our school. But yeah, it was really something to be on a career path that I really passionately believed in. But on top of this is where I kind of, as long as we're talking about where we are now and what we're passionate about now, I also built up a really great passion for coffee during this time. I was always into coffee, but in Bangkok, it was a kind of a small community of boutique coffee people who had cafes, and they would get together and talk about coffee all the time. And I had like 3 months between jobs in the middle of the time in Thailand, and so I became a barista for those 3 months. And it just got me connected with so many different people in the coffee industry, and it was just so cool to be a part of something like that and to see the coffee industry, what we call the third wave. So it's just like when people start, all the fancy coffee, they love it over there. And it was just really cool. I went to coffee farms. I got to visit processing factories in different parts of Asia. It really opened doors for me to be in this community, and that was really awesome. So when it came to the end,
you were talking about setting up a cafe or something.
Well, yeah. So I became really passionate about that idea, and right at the end of my teaching contract, I was actually could have really gone two ways. I'd been offered a job at a cafe with one of my best mates to help them out in their kind of very young business that they'd set up, cafe business, or it was go to Singapore. And this is probably a real turning point, because it would have been super different directions. And I could have joined this cafe business, which just after I left exploded, by the way. And it would have been amazing. or go to Singapore, which obviously I did, and I got a job as a teacher there. And I guess, I don't know, these Singapore years were quite interesting, but I don't really want to focus on this part very much because we're kind of getting really into almost the present now. But I was in Singapore from 2018 until 2020. And
I wonder what happened in 2020.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
What could that be?
So my time in Singapore was quite stressful. Singapore is not necessarily a super interesting place to be. It's a great place to get out of. So with my now girlfriend, we did a lot of travel getting out of Singapore. But Singapore is a work hard, play hard town. And it was just very, very exhausting. We both just couldn't handle it anymore. And my partner at the time decided, she had been there like 5 years already. And then we did a big trip back to New Zealand in 2019. And that was like really life-changing because that was my first trip to New Zealand in 11 years, I think.
Well, was it that long?
Yeah. So you can imagine, if you know anything about New Zealand, it's just insane. It's scenery-wise. If you go there as a tourist, it's mind-blowing. And I had that full experience going back as an outsider.
You romanticize it, don't you? As well.
100%.
Like, oh,
I'd already romanticized it, but then seeing it in the flesh, I was like, holy shit, this is actually what I imagined it to be. I just have to come back. And after the stressful environment of Singapore, it's like, holy shit, this is utopia. And we both decided that it was time for us to leave Singapore, and we thought about different options, and then it was just settled on New Zealand. It was the place to be. So actually, we decided to leave January 2020. Something else happened in January 2020, which coincidentally just so happened to be at the same time. So there's a lot of drama, obviously, leading up to around this little COVID section, which we don't really have time to go over now, but I'm gonna leave the story there because there's this whole COVID chapter for me, which I probably would like to share separately in a future episode dedicated to those few years. There's a lot of stuff that went on for me from 2020 until the present, so I'm just going to leave it at that point. I apologize, Briar. I've taken up basically the whole episode.
Right.
I've got it out. I've talked about like 6 years worth of stuff, so no pressure.
I don't even know where to start now.
Yeah.
I guess
the last point we came together was that time when you came and visited St. Pat's Day in Bangkok.
Yes, and that was 2015.
That was the first time I met your partner, right?
Was it? Or no,
of course not. Of course, because of the holiday.
To us. Yeah,
of course. But it was the first time kind of seeing you guys
in
together. A completely different context.
Yes. Yeah.
Where we went out drinking and
it
was a good time.
And again, it was the first time me seeing you as that new person as well. Not attached to your wife and that cloud.
Yep.
So yeah, that was good fun actually. That trip. And we went to Australia that trip too. So I think we came to you first in Thailand and then went to visit Mum and Dad in Hervey Bay. And I can't remember how long that was, but that was a good trip and it was fun hanging out with the new version of yourself too. Like, because obviously I'd been sort of this, I had been going out drinking and stuff for years, and it was fun to be able to go out. And
it was kind of like it wasn't the first time that we drank together, but it was the first time I felt like we could.
Well, yeah, and
I felt like I could.
Yeah, exactly, and it was sort of a lot more liberal and fun, and you took us around, and it was the first time for us being in Thailand too. So you got to show us around. So yeah, we loved it there too. It was a good time. And basically from 2015 to 2017, actually, nothing really significant happened. We were still, traveling lots and things were stable and good for us. but probably about 20, it must have been after we got back from Thailand. I just started feeling quite homesick, which I hadn't felt in a long time. And by homesick, I mean I talk about New Zealand. New Zealand will always be my home, but England will also always be my home because I was there for nearly 10 years. And most of my adult life actually was in England. So both places for me feel like home.
What was it about New Zealand that you actually missed? Like,
probably
what made
the
you
same
feel
things,
connected?
Probably the same things you just was discussing. Like, I had romanticized it. Obviously, I'd been back to visit in 2012, and in your head, it's quite different when you go on holiday. Doing all the fun things, and it's summertime, and life's great, right? So every time I'd leave New Zealand, I would just be feeling so emotional about leaving. And I was like, I want to come home. And my partner knew this. I'd expressed that I was feeling homesick. But it's a long process and it's very stressful. This was not the first time I'd done an international move.
But it was his, though.
Yes. So this would have been my third time doing an international move, because we decided in the end that we would go back, and we ummed and ahed about it for a long time. And I said to him, look, I don't want to force you to go if you don't want to leave England, because his family's there. And I said to him, if you don't want to, I won't go. I don't want to get there and you resent me for taking you away from your home. And he was like, no, like, I'm ready for a new adventure and like, let's do this. So, got the ball rolling, and it was looking at jobs, and I ended up leaving my job in beginning of 2017 or March 2017. And I was working at a daycare at the time, and I had a family approach me asking if I would like to nanny for them for a month. They were going to New Zealand, and I was like, hell yeah, like I'll go. They were paying for my flights, and like I was like, cool, I'll go nanny for you. So I went back to New Zealand with them for a month in March 2017. I came back, and by then it was like end of April, and then I had already booked flights to go back to New Zealand for a good friend of mine. Her wedding was that May, so I went back again.
Hold on, was that the family that took you to Blenheim?
Yes. So I spent a month there nannying, and my partner came out to visit while I was there for a couple of weeks as well. So so it was quite cool. And then so I came back in the May. So I had been back to New Zealand more times in the last sort of 6 weeks than I had like in years. So it made me super excited about coming back to New Zealand.
And you got to see old friends and things, right? Yeah.
So although I hadn't been to Blenheim really, which is in the top of the South Island, I hadn't really spent any time there. So it was all new to me, that area, but it made me super excited to be back in New Zealand. So I came back to England. It was quite stressful we had a house to sell. My partner was still working full time, whereas I had finished in March. So it was me who was dealing with trying to find somewhere to live in New Zealand. My partner was still doing interviews and stuff, so he didn't have a job yet. So basically we were just waiting for him to get accepted. And we had his visa and everything. And I
remember that time you guys stressing out a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge commitment, and I was like, oh, did I quit work too early? But actually looking back, no, I needed someone needed to, arrange everything, because we decided to take all our stuff as well. So it was arranging the container and so much to organise. We also had a cat, had to organise shipping for him to get to New Zealand. But anyway, during this time, we were also like, we want to visit as many places in Europe as we can before we leave. So we spent, as often as we could on, my partner's week off or weekends. We did a snowboard trip in Austria just before coming, went to Berlin, lots of little trips, just so that we felt like, yep, we've seen as many places as we can before we go, because once you're in New Zealand, you're very isolated from the rest of the world, and
it's like being on another planet.
Yeah, it's highly unlikely that you'll, A, be able to afford it, and B, have the time to fly to anywhere other than somewhere close like Australia or the islands. So anyway, my partner got a job in a place called New Plymouth. And actually, I hadn't been to New Plymouth before.
It's funny because it's very easy to look back in hindsight and pinpoint, well, you're projecting back how you feel about the place you are now. But I remember when you said New Plymouth, I was like, what the fuck? And you must have had some sense of that as well, because if you grow up in New Zealand, nobody goes to New Plymouth. No. People who have never left New Zealand still haven't been to New Plymouth.
If you don't know, New Plymouth is sort of out on a limb on the west coast of the North Island. And
it's quite isolated out there.
Yeah, it is. It's our nearest city's probably 2 or 3 hours away. And I hadn't been here, and I had heard from people like, oh, it's a bit of a slow place to be living.
Backwater.
Yeah. So, we arrived October 2017. It was like, drove down to New Plymouth, and we're like, shit, okay, so this is where we're going to live. I remember the first thing I said, because there's people here call it a motorway. It really isn't. It's just like a dual carriageway. I was like, oh my God, they've got a dual carriageway here. Like, it's big enough to have a dual carriageway. We'll be all right. So, that was 2017 that we came here.
So for context, New Plymouth is like a town of, 70,000?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Approximately, yeah.
And that includes sort of the wider rural area or outer skirts of the city.
Yeah. So how did you actually kind of feel, with that sense of home, that you were homesick and now you're back on quote-unquote home turf? Did that feeling match what you would expect it to be?
It did to begin with, because I wasn't working. We were going into the warmer months. It was exciting to be back. We were exploring this new place we were going to live. Everything was new again, because it had been, I left New Zealand in 2008. So it was all exciting and new. So it definitely matched, like, oh, this feels so good to be home. Like, I love the lifestyle. New Plymouth's right on the coast. So, we'd go to the beach. We've got the mountain there. Like, there were so many cool things to do. And so, it was really exciting and definitely matched my expectation at that time. But it didn't, New Zealand is not the same place it was when I left all those years ago.
Was it ever though? That's the thing. Like, you have different views and different based on different experiences of what a place is like. You're not the same person.
Yeah, and coming back for holiday, it's always a good time, right? It's so different when you come back to live here. And definitely, it's been a tough, it's been 6 years now. It's been a tough 6 years actually adjusting to real life here. Same shit, different place. We don't have time to go into all the stuff about New Zealand that's not great, but we do love living here. We're in a beautiful region, but we still do miss home being England as well. It's so far and expensive to go back, and we've went back last year, but yeah.
I think for those people who have lived or set up house in multiple times in different places around the world, you would understand that the feeling of home is actually really, really complicated.
It is,
and putting down roots in one place is not as simple as you might imagine it to be. And you have more of a sense of home than I do, that's for sure. You've done 3 international moves? I've done like 6. And each time you move, you leave a little part of yourself there, even if it was only a short amount of time. And you pick up a lot of stuff too, though, right? You don't leave empty-handed. You can leave with some bullshit as well, but at the same time, you take away some experiences that people who stay at home would not have had. And that was quite a challenge for me, trying to negotiate what home meant to me and to this day, I don't really use the word home in the context that most people do. Just it's too difficult to describe what home is for me.
Yeah. And also, I guess, coming into those COVID years too, I definitely was grateful to be in a place like New Zealand during that time, like given all the shit that was going on in the rest of the world. I think we were quite lucky to be in a place like New Zealand during that time. So. Yeah.
And I guess on that, because this is probably when we'll tie it up, our story, when we all came back together again, there is obviously much more to share probably in our individual tales for another time and place, but I guess it's a great time to tie it all together again, being our story, our joint story, because this is about when the time we came together again. And it was an interesting time because, so obviously we came and spent time with you in 2019 with my, spoiler alert, ex-partner, but that's a tale for another time. But the two of us came over from Singapore in 2019 and we stayed with you and we saw your new house for the first time, which you'd not long been in. You showed us around New Plymouth very proudly, my first time in New Plymouth, and that was part of that journey. And then of course we went down to the South Island and experienced that together. So that was a big part of me wanting to come back. That was a very attractive idea for me to come back to New Zealand, but also a New Zealand that had family again. And it was just kind of this rediscovering of the fact that, we are family, like we started to feel like family again, not strangers. However, there was still a lot of distance there, right? And when we moved back, you guys very kindly put us up. And things kind of turned to shit because of lockdown and everything. But then all of a sudden we were living together. we had,
and not only were you living with us, we had a friend from England visiting at the time. That's right, yeah. Who ended up obviously being stuck here because of COVID. So there was 5 of us all living in our house.
Yeah.
For, was it, a month or something?
Yeah, it was a full-on time, but we'd not spent so much time together since I probably left home, and that was really interesting time of getting to know each other again and getting on each other's nerves again, remembering that we're related again. Because when you're growing up with someone, when you know someone really well, you normally brothers and sisters, you just speak your mind. And it was kind of rediscovering that dynamic of a relationship as well. And I think still, even then though, I wouldn't have predicted that 3 years later would be where we are now doing this. I didn't think that we would be in a point where we'd be able to talk in such a relaxed fashion about life. And that for me, I guess, if we're talking about tying things up, at the end of this whole thing, that has been the most valuable part of this experience for me, is the fact that it's like we have rediscovered a brotherly and sisterly bond.
More like a friendship now.
Yeah, it didn't really exist before. And in case everyone out there still continues to think that we're just putting this on, you have no idea how different we are and how many years we have almost literally hated each other.
We've come full circle.
Yeah, shit. It's quite hard to believe. And I think probably there are still people who are listening to this from the old days who still find it hard to believe. Yes. So, I mean, I've really valued that. And hopefully we're going to have some time before the baby pops out to actually do a proper reflective exercise.
But just in case.
Just in case, yeah. Do you have any kind of final words, Briar?
No, I think someone was talking to me about this over the weekend and was asking about the podcast, and I was saying how cathartic it's been and rewarding to go through this process with you and talk about life, life shit that, both of us had no idea about what the other one was going through, and being so far removed from each other for such a long time, it's been so cool to reconnect with those gaps in our relationship, so to speak. So yeah, that's been quite cool to reconnect again in that way.
And it's been kind of like starting up a cold motor in a car, right? You know, the engine was turning over at first, but it wasn't really starting. And it probably wasn't until probably maybe a few episodes in, maybe halfway along, that we actually felt like the engine was actually moving and warming up. And that was kind of happening in real time, not just as a podcast adventure, but in terms of this kind of rediscovering of, I guess, reconnecting with each other as well. So
yeah,
thanks, I guess. I hope we get a chance
crickets chirping.
Yeah, pretty sure I saw a tumbleweed past.
Yeah. You could just end on that sound.
It's a squeaky door. Here comes the cowboy. All right, so we'll sign off there, and hopefully we'll get to go through this whole thing and talk about it in some detail. Just if we do get a chance, it'll just be a very quick, dedicated reflection. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us along with us on this journey. It's been great for us, and we hope that it's been really great for you. I hope you've learned not just stuff about us. Really, our greatest hope was that you would learn something about yourselves, and not by reflecting that you've had the same experiences as us, but at the very least helped you think about your own past, your own personality, your own trauma, your own experience, and that you've been able to hopefully kind of reconnect with that. And even if you haven't dealt with it yet, we're all still dealing with shit. So that's, I want you to come out with that.
It's a never-ending story in that sense.
Okay. It's okay to still be dealing with stuff. We want to end it on a hopeful note, because life doesn't always get better, but it can get better. And it's all about perspective. And I'm definitely have been appreciating a lot more just this process of going through all this stuff, and with you as well, Briar. Anyway, I'm rambling. But yeah, thanks you, everyone. Thank you very much, and remember to look out for future episodes of This Is Our Story. Keep an eye out on the Facebook page, This Is Our Story, and on the Instagram account, ourstory_pod, where I'll be putting some updates up about the future of the podcast. Hopefully. Hopefully I've got lots to catch up on. Anyway, thank you one and all, and we are signing out.
Thanks, friends. Bye.
Ciao.